Welcome to the channel, everybody. I'm down here in the book bunker, and I am going to talk today to you about Edward Gibbon, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, chapters 15 and 16. This is the next installment on the Great Books Reading Plan playlist, year one, which is taking a lot longer than a year, but that's okay. We're going at our own pace. Chapters 15 and 16 cover the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire and how the Romans responded to it. So I want to do some little summarizing of what's in these chapters, and then we'll encounter some editorial comments that are from this volume, the Introduction to the Great Books and to a Liberal Education, the Great Ideas program that Britannica released. And they have a couple discussion questions that I want to raise for you too as well. So let's jump right into it. First, we'll do chapter 15. Chapter 15 in this massive, long book by Gibbon is about the progress of the Christian religion and the sentiments, manners, numbers, and condition of the primitive Christians. So a lot of the space in this chapter has to do with Gibbon trying to explain the growth of Christianity, and he attributes it to 5 causes. First, what he calls the zeal of the Jews, its gradual increase. The religion was better suited to defense than to conquest, while the Christians, who were, again, coming out of the Jewish tradition, had a more liberal zeal. He discusses the Nazarene Church of Jerusalem, the Ebionites, the Gnostics, other various sects, their abhorrence of idolatry, their ceremonies, arts, and festivals. The second cause is the doctrine of the immortality of the soul among the philosophers. And here he compares these thoughts about immortality of the soul among the pagans of Greece and Rome, to the barbarians and Jews, and then to the Christians. And he covers their views about the end of the world, the doctrine of the millennium, the conflagration of Rome and the world, and the eternal punishment. The third growth cause was miraculous powers of the primitive church, talking about miracles here, how their truth was contested, the perplexity in defining this miraculous period, and the use of primitive miracles. But a lot of people believed in those miracles. Then we have cause number 4, the virtues of the first Christians, the effects of their repentance, the care of their reputation, the morality of the fathers, the principles of human nature, their condemnation of pleasure and luxury, their attitudes towards marriage and chastity, and their aversion to the business of war and government. And then lastly, cause number 5, the Christians were active in the government of the church. So the organization of the church, its primitive freedom and equality, the institution of bishops, the episcopal authority, preeminence of the metropolitan churches, and their various policies and practices of the early church. So there's a lot of detail he goes into. This is just kind of his synopsis of what he's covering there. But I did want to sum up at the end of this section. There's a quote which kind of gives you like the synthesis of all this. So he says, and quoting Gibbon, "It was by the aid of these causes," and he's going to enumerate them again: exclusive zeal, the immediate expectation of another world, the claim of miracles, the practice of rigid virtue, and the constitution of the primitive church, that Christianity spread itself with so much success in the Roman Empire. To the first of these, the Christians were indebted for their invincible valor, which disdained to capitulate with the enemy whom they were resolved to vanquish. The 3 succeeding causes supplied their valor with the most formidable arms. The last of these causes united their courage, directed their arms, and gave their efforts that irresistible weight which even a small band of well-trained and intrepid volunteers has so often possessed over an undisciplined multitude, ignorant of the subject and careless of the event of the war. All right, so that's kind of the heart of that chapter. And then we move on to chapter 16, which is about the conduct of the Roman government towards the Christians from the reign of Nero to that of Constantine, at which point Christianity achieved a sort of an official status in the empire. So to summarize here, Gibbon analyzes why the Romans persecuted the Christians, their wavering tolerance and intolerance towards the Jews and then towards the upstart Christian believers. Some of the historical incidents that are discussed in this chapter include the fire of Rome under Nero and how the Christians were blamed for it, the oppression of Jews and Christians by Domitian, the execution of Clemens the consul, Trajan's legal mode of proceeding against the Christians, the trials of Christians, and martyrs such as Cyprian, the bishop of Carthage, plus the policies of succeeding emperors towards the Christians, the peace and the prosperity of the church under Diocletian, and then Galerius's influence on Diocletian to begin a general persecution of the Christians, and then the demolition of the church of Nicomedia and the first edict against the Christians, the fire of the palace of Nicomedia. Additional edicts were issued, and then ultimately the Edict of Toleration under Galerius, and the end of the persecutions. And then the chapter concludes with Gibbon estimating just how many martyrs there really were over these about 300 years. Gibbon thinks it's not as many as people think it is. And I think when you read these two chapters, you might be alarmed, maybe alarmed is the wrong word, you might be surprised by the fact that Gibbon is not the biggest fan of Christianity. He's skeptical, he's puzzled by it, he's confounded by its rise, he's doing his best to explain this kind of improbable phenomenon of the rise of Christianity in the West. And listen to his voice, how he concludes chapter 16. I think this will come across. It's a long quote, but it really helps to hear Gibbon's style. We shall conclude this chapter by a melancholy truth which obtrudes itself on the reluctant mind, that even admitting without hesitation or inquiry all that history has recorded or devotion has feigned on the subject of martyrdoms, it must still be acknowledged that the Christians, in the course of their intestine dissensions, have inflicted far greater severities on each other than they had experienced from the zeal of infidels. During the ages of ignorance, which followed the subversion of the Roman Empire in the West, the bishops of the imperial city extended their dominion over the laity as well as clergy of the Latin Church. The fabric of superstition which they had erected and which might long have defied the feeble efforts of reason was at length assaulted by a crowd of daring fanatics who from the 12th to the 16th century assumed the popular character of reformers. The Church of Rome defended by violence the empire which she had acquired by fraud. A system of peace and benevolence was soon disgraced by the proscriptions, wars, massacres, and the institution of the Holy Office. And as the reformers were animated by the love of civil as well as of religious freedom, the Catholic princes connected their own interest with that of the clergy and enforced by fire and sword the terrors of spiritual censures. In the Netherlands alone, more than 100,000 of the subjects of Charles V are said to have suffered by the hand of the executioner, and this extraordinary number is attested by Grotius, a man of genius and learning, who preserved his moderation amidst the fury of contending sects, and who composed the annals of his own age and country at a time when the invention of printing had facilitated the means of intelligence and increased the danger of detection. If we are obliged to submit our belief to the authority of Grotius, it must be allowed that the number of Protestants who were executed in a single province and a single reign far exceeded that of the primitive martyrs in the space of 3 centuries and of the Roman Empire. But if the improbability of the fact itself should prevail over the weight of evidence, if Grotius should be convicted of exaggeration, the merit and sufferings of the reformers, we shall be naturally led to inquire what confidence can be placed in the doubtful and imperfect moments of ancient credulity, what degree of credit can be assigned to a courtly bishop and a passionate declaimer who, under the protection of Constantine, enjoyed the exclusive privilege of recording the persecutions inflicted on the Christians by the vanquished rivals or disregarded predecessors of their gracious sovereign. That's the end of chapter 16 in Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So turning to this book for some guidance, the editors of this volume acknowledge 2 characteristics that are most worthy of mention. So I will mention them here too. The first is Gibbon's attitude towards Christianity, which we've just been talking about. Gibbon's candid yet rational approach to history is indicative of the age of enlightenment from which he springs. He tends to be skeptical and sharply critical of Christianity, this religion which is sort of filled with miracles and superstition and belief and faith and all. For instance, he calls the Christian clergy, quote, a celebrated order of men which has furnished the most important, though not always the most edifying, subjects for modern history. Second is Gibbon's style, his prose style. Gibbon is a master of the periodic sentence and balanced phrasing. He's fond of using words and opposed meanings to draw sharp contrast. He's a master of irony, a master of understatement. Read him aloud to catch his drift, because sometimes, he can be very long-winded, but if you really go slow, you pay attention to the rhythm and pace and balance of his sentences and these oppositions, you'll start to kind of sense the subtext and his real attitude about things. It's a very engaging style if you give him a chance. So I want to cover, to finish up here, a couple questions that this book raises. They have about 4 or 5 questions, but I'm just going to highlight 2 of them. The first has to do with Gibbon's attitudes and opinions. Is Gibbon's work invalidated because of his attitudes and opinions? He is very opinionated, a very opinionated historian. Well, to answer this, I would say, of course, it's not invalidated. This guy really did his research. I mean, this is heavily footnoted text, and the fact is, no historian is completely impartial and objective. It's just a fact of life. Historians always have a slant. Every writer has a slant. And Gibbon, at least, wears his prejudices pretty much on his sleeve. He isn't really hiding much from us. You might be a little bit not deceived, but you might think, based on his style and the sort of authority of his voice, that he's passing himself off as being objective. But if you really pay attention to what he's reading, he's pretty much open about his I guess modern term we would use would be bias, but it's detectable, and you can account for it. And you can weigh it. And then you might say, well, he has a slant, but, he's right about it. So just because you have a slant doesn't mean you're wrong. And I think this is a guy, what did he spend, like 20, 30 years writing this book? So it's pretty impressive, the amount of reading he did. And, he's entitled to have a take, would be my opinion. The second question, how does the rise of Christianity relate to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire? Well, this is a gigantic question. And Gibbon's chapters, I would say, open the door. They provide a gateway to begin to have some answers to that, but I don't think they're the last word on it. I think you'd have to read a lot of other histories and Christian historians and other historians to really kind of assemble a satisfactory answer to that question. So this is kind of just like the beginning of that discussion. The heart of the question to me seems to be whether Christianity fueled the decline of the Roman Empire, accelerated the decline of the Roman Empire, or whether Christianity's rise didn't cause it, but more is correlated to it, like an inverse correlation. Christianity's rising while Rome is falling. So they didn't cause the decline, but you might even go so far as to argue that Christianity extended the reach of the empire, that, as, the empire was going to fall anyway, and Christianity sort of gave it a little bit of a longer life, where this political collapse was then replaced by a spiritual empire lorded over by the Christian church in the East and the West. I'm really thinking primarily of the Western Roman Catholic Church. So it's a huge, very important question, and it really gets at the impact that this shift had in Western history. I mean, this is one of the big ones, the big change from the ancient world of Greece and Rome to the Christian world, which really dominates for about 1,000 years. You could argue then there's another major transformation from that world to the modern world, which is the age of reason and science and things like that. But this is a question that I think should always be on our minds, and try to explain these changes. Now, in terms of how this reading compares to some of the other readings in our year one reading list, I couldn't help but think of the Acts of the Apostles, which was reading number 7, which was, early church history, like following the death and resurrection of Jesus, like what happened there, how things were sort of beginning to form. That is certainly something you could pair with this reading. Augustine's Confessions would be another one, where, he's dealing with this sort of change from the ancient to classical world and that world of learning and literacy to, his conversion to Christianity and the different, the heresies that he's grappling with and all that. So that's another work that would compare here. And, although it's not on this list, I just finished reading The City of God by Augustine, and that one is definitely comparable to these chapters in Gibbon. So that was on my mind as I was reading these chapters. So if you're following along on the reading list, let me know what you thought of Gibbon's chapters and his conclusions, his analysis of why Christianity rose, and his history of the Roman response to it. So anyway, that's going to wrap up Gibbon for now. Let's move on to the next reading, and we will now turn to the founders of the United States. So this would be the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Federalist Papers, specifically numbers 1 through 10, number 15, number 31, number 47, number 51, and numbers 68 through 71. And I think we're going to have our mind on some of the previous readings we've covered recently, namely John Locke concerning civil government and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social contract, as we go through these founding documents of the American Republic. So that'll be fun to get into. And obviously we'll have things to say about the state of the Constitution in our present day, which may be in tatters, folks, but that's a discussion worth having as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do a thumbs up, like on it. I hope you become a subscriber, and I encourage you all to comment and ask questions. I always look forward to seeing what you have to say about this. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back again, I hope, real soon. Bye-bye.